One driver pulled over on the Stuart Highway, switched on his hazard lights and started counting dead kangaroos. Not because he had nothing better to do, but because what he was seeing genuinely didn't add up. Over one 5-minute stretch of road, he counted 43 carcasses, and by the time he finished the full trip, he'd tallied roughly 2,800 on that single highway alone. Most tourists don't learn the real rule until they're already exhausted, already running late, already telling themselves that another 2 hours won't matter. Night driving in the Australian Outback isn't dangerous the way wet roads are dangerous, or mountain passes are dangerous. Locals who've spent decades out there treat the rule like gravity. Be off the road before dark. No exceptions. No negotiations. These are 10 of the most dangerous stretches of highway in the Outback, and the specific reasons why that rule exists. The Nullarbor is where the danger becomes almost architectural, because the road itself is designed in a way that works against you. Running across southern Australia, somewhere near its centre sits the longest straight road in the country, 146 kilometres without a single bend. During daylight hours, that's an extraordinary thing to experience. Harsh and flat and genuinely impressive. After dark, the same feature becomes a trap because the human brain was not built to process 2 hours of perfectly straight road in total darkness while remaining reliably alert. Locals describe the Nullarbor at night as a marsupial rave, and that phrase earns its accuracy. Warm asphalt holds heat long after sunset. The drainage runoff keeps the roadside grass slightly greener than the surrounding scrub, and every animal for kilometres around suddenly has reasons to be exactly where your headlights are about to reach. Kangaroos, wombats, camels, dingoes, all of them moving onto the road surface at the same time. None of that would matter quite as much somewhere else, but on the Nullarbor there is genuinely nothing out there. Phone coverage disappears across enormous stretches. Towns sit 200 kilometres apart or more, and a disabled vehicle at night can mean waiting 4 or 5 hours for another car to pass. Some insurance companies have added policy clauses that void coverage entirely for Nullarbor night driving, and certain rental car companies in South Australia flag this at the counter when you pick up the keys, not as a suggestion, but as a contractual condition. Running almost exactly through the vertical centre of Australia, from Port Augusta in the south all the way to Darwin, the Stuart Highway is the main artery through the red centre, and during daylight hours, it's one of the more impressive drives on the continent. After dark, road safety researchers in South Australia have documented sections where kangaroo density reaches roughly 1 animal every 100 metres. What that means practically is that at highway speed, with headlights giving maybe 3 or 4 seconds of reaction time, and with kangaroos that freeze rather than flee and then jump sideways in completely unpredictable directions, the math stops working in the driver's favour. And that's before the road trains enter the picture. 50 metres long, sometimes more, with multiple trailers, and these trucks push a wall of air pressure that rocks smaller vehicles sideways on the highway, and they kick up dust clouds that can drop visibility to effectively zero in under a second. Drivers have emerged from a road train's dust wake to find large animals standing in their path with no time to react. The truck already long gone around the next bend. The animals strike and the truck are part of the same event, but they happen seconds apart, and the driver survives neither. Most of the Gibb River Road is unsealed, red dirt and corrugated gravel cutting through the Kimberley region, and the cattle situation here is what separates it from the roads that merely have wildlife problems. Properties in this country run largely unfenced, or fenced with old infrastructure that cattle push through regularly, which means drivers aren't just watching for kangaroos and wombats, they're watching for 600-kilogram animals that are dark brown or black standing in the middle of an unlit dirt road and completely invisible until the distance is too short for any braking to help. Collisions with cattle at outback highway speeds don't work like ordinary vehicle accidents. The animal's body mass comes through the windscreen, and people have died exactly this way. Several rental companies operating in the Kimberley have written night driving exclusions directly into their contracts for the Gibb River Road. having calculated the risk and decided it falls outside what they're willing to cover. What makes this particularly worth understanding is the type of traveller who typically ends up on the Gibb. Not novices usually, but people who've done research, who have a four-wheel drive, who feel ready for remote driving. The road looks manageable, that's the problem. Crossing the top of Australia from Cairns in Queensland all the way to Broome in Western Australia, the Savannah Way passes through 3 states, cuts through World Heritage Wilderness, and covers some of the most genuinely remote terrain on the continent. Fuel stop spacing is what drives the specific danger here, with some stretches running 200 kilometres or more between stations, and several of those stations operating on hours that are optimistic at best. And a traveller who misjudges their fuel situation in the mid-afternoon can find themselves at dusk facing a choice between pushing on in the dark or camping where they stopped. Locals will tell you to camp every single time, and the reasoning goes beyond wildlife. Extreme daytime heat, high humidity across the northern sections, and the sheer distance from any medical facility mean that a breakdown at night on the Savannah Way can shift from an inconvenience to a medical emergency within a few hours, depending on conditions and the person. In certain northern sections near creek crossings, the risk doesn't stop at kangaroos. Crocodile territory makes walking for help in darkness a genuinely different calculation than it would be anywhere else on this list. Connecting the Stuart Highway near Alice Springs to Bowlia in Queensland across roughly 750 kilometres of remote country, the Plenty Highway sees fewer than 10 vehicles per day across some sections. 10 vehicles per day. A breakdown at night, a blowout, an animal strike, a mechanical failure leaves realistic options that urban drivers genuinely struggle to conceptualise. Phone coverage is non-existent across most of the route. A satellite emergency beacon summons help, but that help might be a Royal Flying Doctor Service aircraft, and depending on weather and the time of night, the response runs to hours. Fatigue compounds everything on the Plenty, because the road's monotony works against alertness in a way that other roads don't. Transport Accident Commission research from Victoria found that driving on fewer than 5 hours of sleep raises crash risk by 4.5 times, and under 4 hours that number climbs to 11.5 times. On the Plenty, even rested drivers have reported micro-sleep episodes in full daylight without realising what happened until afterward. At night, on that same road, the conditions are worse in every direction simultaneously. Running from Marri to Marla through South Australia's Channel Country, the Oodnadatta Track passes through the tiny township of Oodnadatta, population around 200, and its reputation among experienced outback travellers sits noticeably higher than its public profile would suggest. The road surface is unsealed and changes with weather, becoming impassable after significant rain and developing deep corrugations during extreme heat that destroy tyres over distance. Wildlife density at night matches anything else on this list, but the terrain creates an additional problem that flatter roads don't have. On the open Nullarbor, approaching headlights are visible from enormous distances and give drivers some warning. On the Oodnadatta, the surrounding terrain produces blind approaches, and animals, other vehicles and obstacles emerge from the dark with much less lead time than the same situation would offer on a flat highway. Stretching 520 kilometres from Marri in South Australia to the Queensland border at Birdsville, the Birdsville Track passes along the edge of the Simpson Desert, and the Birdsville races draw thousands of visitors every year. Which means the track gets real traffic during that period and then becomes very quiet for the rest of it. Dingoes are a specific hazard here that doesn't get as much attention as the larger animals. Fast and unpredictable, they're significantly harder to spot at night than cattle or camels, and the gibber plains and sandy country surrounding the track can shift enough between trips that sections which were perfectly straightforward on the way out are meaningfully different on the drive back. Name recognition creates a specific problem on the Birdsville Track that the more obscure roads on this list don't share. Travellers have heard of it, they've read about it. That familiarity tends to reduce perceived risk in a way that the actual road conditions don't justify. And experienced guides working the area have noted the pattern. The most confident travellers sometimes prepare less thoroughly because the track's fame reads to them as evidence that it's been tamed. Northwest of Alice Springs and cutting into Western Australia through the Tanami Desert, the Tanami Road covers about 1,000 kilometres of mostly unsealed track, with fuel available at Yuendumu and the community of Halls Creek before bitumen returns. Cattle grids on the Tanami present a specific hazard that sealed highway drivers don't encounter. Crossing multiple pastoral leases, the road depends on grids to keep livestock off the surface, and during daylight hours, that system works reasonably well. At night, particularly after heavy rain when grids may be damaged or partially buried under debris, the grids themselves become obstacles, and the long sections between them mean cattle are regularly on the road surface with nothing preventing it. Road train traffic on the Tanami doesn't follow predictable schedules the way freight on sealed highways does. Trucks travel when conditions allow, not on timetables, and encountering one on an unsealed surface at night, where the dust cloud is thicker and the road offers less confident footing, produces conditions that experienced Tanami drivers describe as among the most disorienting they've dealt with in outback travel. Running 460 kilometres through South Australia's Channel Country between Lyndhurst and Inaminka, the Strzelecki Track accesses significant opal mining territory and passes near the dig tree associated with the Burke and Wills expedition of 1860. Summer temperatures in this country regularly hit 45 degrees Celsius during the day, which leads experienced travellers to rest during the hottest afternoon hours rather than driving through them. And that rest period creates pressure to make up distance in the evening, which is precisely when evening becomes night faster than people expect. The Strzelecki's particular risk is that some travel guides describe it as easier than the Birdsville Track or the Oodnadatta, which is a relative judgment that loses its meaning when applied to night driving conditions. Wildlife and isolation risks on the Strzelecki are comparable to both. The road surface can be worse than either after wet weather, and the easier reputation has a way of producing travellers who arrive with slightly less preparation than the road actually warrants. Here's the entry that probably matters most for the majority of people watching this, because it addresses something that the other 9 entries don't quite capture: the Stuart Highway, the Eyre Highway, the roads into the Eyre Peninsula. These are sealed roads with lane markings, rest stops, and regular service towns. Standing at a fuel station on the Stuart Highway, west of Mildura at dusk, nothing about the road signals a high-stakes decision. White lines, road signs, traffic coming and going. The road looks completely normal. At night, unfenced farmland along sealed regional highways puts livestock on the road across rural sections, and wildlife density through regional South Australia and Western Australia stays high across areas far larger than the famous tracks. None of that is visible at the fuel stop. The animals that will be on the road in 2 hours aren't there yet. Regional Australia records road fatalities at 9.6 per 100,000 people compared to 2.2 per 100,000 in cities. And that gap doesn't come only from the Nullarbor and the Birdsville Track. A significant portion comes from ordinary-looking regional highways driven at night by people who looked at the road, saw white lines and signage, and decided the risk was something other than what it was. Locals find this pattern genuinely frustrating to watch from the roadhouse window, the moment when a traveller checks their watch, looks at the road, and decides another hour is fine, not knowing that the situation changes completely once the light goes. There's one thing about all of this that makes it genuinely difficult to communicate to someone who hasn't been there, and it comes down to this: the roads look fine. The Nullarbor is flat, maintained, and well signed. The Stuart Highway has rest stops and clearly marked distances. Even the Gibb River Road is just a dirt track, the kind that millions of people drive without incident across dozens of countries every year. Nothing about these roads announces the level of risk the way a washed-out bridge announces danger, or a mountain pass in a blizzard announces danger. A 600-kilogram camel standing in the middle of a dark highway is invisible at 200 metres. At 110 kilometres per hour, a vehicle covers that distance in around 6.5 seconds. and braking from that speed on a straight road takes 80 to 100 metres minimum. No intervention saves the driver in that situation. Not skill, not reaction time, not experience. Survivors of outback animal strikes, people who walked away because they had bull bars, or because the animal was smaller, or because they happened to be going slightly slower, consistently say the same thing when interviewed afterward. They didn't drive well, they got lucky. A long-haul truckie told the ABC exactly what that means in practical terms. Luck is not a travel plan. Locals who give the be off the road before dark advice aren't being overcautious, and they're not trying to scare off visitors. They're pattern matching across decades of watching people make the same calculation and arrive at the same wrong answer. They know what the carcass count looks like the morning after a warm night on the Nullarbor. At some point, they stopped explaining the statistics and started just saying, stop before sunset, wait until morning, every time. Have you driven any of these roads, night or day? What the experience actually felt like compared to what you expected is something the research can't fully capture, and the first-hand accounts in the comments are consistently more useful than anything a summary can offer. If real places, real risks, and the things that don't make it into the tourism brochures are interesting to you, subscribe and stay around. There's more of it coming.